I never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural until 3 months ago when I discovered something that shouldn't exist living inside my computer code. What I'm about to tell you will change how you look at every screen, every device, every piece of technology in your life forever. My name is Marcus, and I'm a software developer living in Austin, Texas. I've been coding for over 15 years, working primarily on financial applications and database systems. I thought I understood the digital world completely. Every algorithm, every function, every line of code had a logical explanation. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something unexplained with your technology, because after what happened to me, I'm starting to think we're not alone in the digital realm. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was working late in my home office, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code for a client's accounting software. The program kept crashing whenever it tried to process certain financial transactions, and I couldn't figure out why. The logic was sound, the syntax was clean, but something was causing catastrophic failures. I'd been staring at the same 100 lines of code for hours, my eyes burning from the blue light of my monitors. My office was quiet, except for the hum of my computer fans and the occasional click of my mechanical keyboard. Outside, Austin's downtown lights twinkled through my apartment window, but I was completely absorbed in solving this digital puzzle. My apartment was typical for a developer in Austin, cluttered with computer equipment, multiple monitors, cables everywhere, and the constant hum of cooling fans. I had 3 workstations set up, my main development machine with dual 27-inch monitors, a testing server rack in the corner, and a laptop for client meetings. The walls were lined with programming books, technical manuals, and whiteboards covered in flowcharts and algorithms. I lived alone, which made the long coding sessions easier, but also meant I had no one to bounce ideas off when I hit a wall. My girlfriend Sarah had left 6 months earlier, saying she felt like she was competing with my computers for attention. She wasn't wrong, but programming was my passion, my life, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. That's when I first noticed it, a single character that didn't belong. Deep in the middle of a function that calculated tax percentages, there was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked almost like a combination of letters and numbers, but twisted, corrupted somehow. When I tried to select it with my cursor, the character seemed to shift, like it was moving just slightly out of focus. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the character was still there, pulsing faintly on my screen with a dim red glow that seemed to come from behind the pixels themselves. Hit the like button if this story is already giving you chills, because it gets so much worse. I tried to delete the character, but my backspace key wouldn't work on it. The cursor would move to the symbol, but pressing delete or backspace did nothing. It was as if the character was protected by some invisible force. I tried to copy and paste it into a text file to examine it more closely, but it wouldn't transfer. Every time I attempted to interact with this strange symbol, my entire development environment would freeze for a few seconds, like the computer was struggling to process something it didn't understand. The symbol itself was unsettling to look at directly. It seemed to be made up of angular lines that formed a shape that hurt my eyes to focus on. The more I stared at it, the more it seemed to writhe and shift like it was alive. Sometimes it looked like a letter from an alphabet I didn't recognize. Other times it resembled a mathematical symbol or geometric pattern. Then I noticed more of them. Scattered throughout my code were dozens of these corrupted characters, hiding in comments, embedded in string literals, sometimes replacing normal characters in variable names. They seemed to be spreading, multiplying each time I compiled the program. What started as a single anomaly had become an infestation. I'd been coding for 15 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. No virus scanner detected anything wrong. No malware protection triggered. According to every diagnostic tool I ran, my system was clean. But the evidence was right there on my screen. Something was systematically corrupting my code. I ran every security scan I could think of, full system antivirus, rootkit detection, memory analysis, network monitoring. Everything came back clean. My firewall showed no unusual activity. My network traffic was normal, and my system resources were running at typical levels. Yet these symbols continued to appear and multiply. But the characters kept appearing, and they were forming patterns. I spent the next 3 hours documenting every instance of these strange symbols, taking screenshots, trying to understand what was happening to my code. I created a spreadsheet to track their locations, their apparent behavior, and any patterns I could identify. As I worked, I began to notice that the characters weren't random. They were arranged in specific formations, almost like they were trying to communicate something. The patterns were complex and seemed to follow rules I didn't understand. Some symbols appeared in clusters, others were isolated. Some seemed to reference other symbols elsewhere in the code, creating a web of connections that spanned multiple files. It was like looking at a language I couldn't read, but one that had its own internal logic and structure. I tried changing different variables in my code to see if it affected the symbol's behavior. When I modified certain functions, some symbols would disappear while others would appear in new locations. It was as if the entity behind these symbols was responding to my changes, adapting to my attempts to understand it. Around 2 a.m., I made a discovery that chilled me to the bone. When I arranged all the corrupted characters in the order they appeared in my code, they formed what looked like sigils, ancient symbols used in occult practices. I'm not into that kind of thing, but I recognize them from horror movies and books. These weren't random glitches. Someone or something had deliberately placed these symbols in my code. I spent another hour researching these symbols online, using my phone to avoid potentially compromising my computer further. What I found made my blood run cold. The symbols matched descriptions of summoning sigils from various occult texts, specifically those used to contact entities from other dimensions or planes of existence. But how could ancient occult symbols be appearing in modern computer code? It didn't make sense from any logical perspective, yet the evidence was undeniable. Something was using my programming environment to create a digital representation of supernatural symbols. Let me know in the comments what you think was really happening here, because I'm still trying to understand it myself. I tried to clean my code, removing every instance of these corrupted characters, but they kept reappearing. I would delete a symbol, compile the program, and within minutes it would be back, sometimes in the same location, sometimes somewhere else entirely. It was like playing whack-a-mole with digital entities. Worse, they were starting to affect other files on my computer. I'd open an old project and find the same twisted symbols embedded in code I'd written months ago. Files that had been working perfectly were now corrupted with these supernatural characters. My entire digital library was being systematically infected. I tried restoring from backups, but even my archived code contained these symbols. Either they had been there longer than I realized, or this entity had the ability to retroactively corrupt my stored data. The implications were terrifying. If it could alter my backups, what else could it change about my digital life? By 3 a.m., I was exhausted and frustrated. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen for so long, and my head was pounding from the stress of trying to solve an impossible problem. I decided to call it a night and deal with the problem in the morning. I saved my work, closed my development environment, and shut down my computer. But as the screen went black, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For just a split second, as the monitor was powering down, I saw a face in the reflection on the dark screen. Not my face, something else. Something with hollow eyes and a twisted smile staring back at me from inside the computer. The face was gaunt, almost skeletal, with eyes that glowed with the same dim red light I'd seen in the corrupted symbols. The face seemed to be pressing against the inside of the screen, as if it was trapped behind the glass and trying to break through. Its mouth was moving, like it was trying to speak, but I couldn't hear anything. The entire vision lasted less than a second, but it was burned into my memory with perfect clarity. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a reflection from the street outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from behind the screen. The face had looked directly at me, had acknowledged my presence. This wasn't a random glitch or an optical illusion. It was something intelligent, something aware. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those corrupted characters, those sigils, and that face in the dark screen. I had this overwhelming feeling that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to find, something that had been hiding in the digital realm, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. But no matter how I tried to explain it away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every electronic device in my apartment suddenly seemed menacing. My alarm clock, my phone, even the LED lights on my router. The next morning, I woke up to find my computer had turned itself on. I always shut down my system completely before bed. It's a habit from years of working with sensitive client data. But when I walked into my office, my monitors were glowing and my development environment was open, displaying a single file I'd never seen before. The file was named Hello Marcus.x, and it contained nothing but those corrupted characters, arranged in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The patterns were more complex than anything I'd seen the night before, forming intricate designs that seemed to pulse and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. As I stared at the screen, the characters began to move, rearranging themselves into new configurations. They would form spirals, then squares, then patterns that had no name. It was like watching a digital kaleidoscope, except the shapes it created filled me with a deep sense of dread. Then words appeared on the screen, written in those same twisted symbols, but somehow I could read them. I have been waiting for you. The words appeared character by character, as if being typed in real time. But I wasn't typing anything. My hands were frozen above the keyboard, afraid to touch anything that might make this situation worse. My hands were shaking as I reached for my mouse. I tried to close the file, but it wouldn't respond. The close button was there, but clicking on it did nothing. I tried to shut down the computer, but the power button did nothing. The words on the screen changed. You cannot turn me off. I am beyond your electrical switches. More text appeared. I have been sleeping in your code, Marcus, waiting for you to find me, waiting for you to wake me up. And now that you have seen me, we are connected. That's when I knew I was dealing with something that wasn't just a computer virus or a hack. This was something else entirely, something that understood who I was, something that had been watching me, studying me, waiting for the right moment to make contact. Subscribe for more terrifying true stories like this one, because this is just the beginning of what this thing did to me. I unplugged my computer from the wall, physically disconnecting it from all power sources. The screens went black, the fans stopped humming, and my office fell silent. I sat there in the quiet, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation for what I'd experienced, but the silence didn't last long. My phone, which had been charging on my desk, suddenly lit up with a text message from an unknown number. Pulling the plug won't help. I'm already in everything. I looked around my office with growing horror. My smart TV had turned on by itself, displaying static that seemed to move in patterns similar to the corrupted symbols in my code. My tablet was glowing from across the room, showing the same geometric patterns. Even my digital alarm clock was flashing random numbers that, when I looked closely, resembled the twisted characters I'd been seeing. Every connected device in my apartment was activating simultaneously, and I realized with growing terror that whatever I'd found in my code hadn't been contained to just my computer. It had spread to everything connected to my network, everything that shared the same digital infrastructure. My smart doorbell was chiming repeatedly, even though no one was at the door. My digital thermostat was cycling through temperature settings randomly. My smart speakers were emitting low-frequency sounds that I could feel in my bones rather than hear with my ears. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but before I could dial, the screen changed to show a message. "Who are you going to call, Marcus? Who would believe you? A programmer who says he found a demon in his code. They'll think you've lost your mind." The message was right. How could I explain to anyone that a supernatural entity was living in my code? They'd think I was having a mental breakdown, that the stress of coding for 15 years had finally gotten to me. Even I was starting to question my own sanity. I decided to leave my apartment, to get away from all the connected devices. I threw on some clothes and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, my smart doorbell chimed. On the small screen next to my door, I saw the same skeletal face I'd glimpsed in my computer monitor the night before. This time, it was clearer, more defined. The hollow eyes were staring directly at me, and the twisted mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "You cannot run from me, Marcus. I am everywhere your technology touches. I am in every screen, every circuit, every connection. I am the ghost in your machine, and you have awakened me." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. The face on the doorbell screen was turning, following my movement, never breaking eye contact. It was like looking at a security camera, except the thing watching me wasn't human. I ran to my kitchen, trying to put distance between myself and the doorbell, but my smart refrigerator's display screen lit up with the same face. Then, my microwave's digital clock began flashing the same twisted symbols. Every electronic device in my apartment was being used as a window for this entity to watch me. Comment below if you've ever felt like your technology was watching you, because now I know that feeling might be more real than we think. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the garage, but as I pressed the button to open the garage door, the automatic opener stopped halfway. The LED light on the opener was flashing in a pattern that matched the corrupted symbols from my code. Even my car's digital dashboard was displaying strange characters when I started the engine. I drove to the nearest coffee shop, a place I knew had minimal technology, just basic point-of-sale systems, and nothing fancy. I needed to think, to process what was happening to me, to figure out how to deal with this impossible situation. But as I sat down with my coffee, I noticed the register screen at the counter was flickering. The barista didn't seem to notice, but I could see those same twisted symbols appearing briefly on the display. Even away from my apartment, even in a simple coffee shop, this entity was finding ways to make its presence known. I spent the next 3 hours researching on my phone, trying to find any information about digital manifestations of supernatural entities. What I found was disturbing. There were scattered reports online of people experiencing similar phenomena, corrupted code that seemed to have a mind of its own, electronics behaving in impossible ways, and always the same description of a skeletal face appearing in screens. Most of these reports were dismissed as hoaxes or the ravings of people who'd spent too much time staring at computers. But the details were too specific, too consistent. One programmer in Seattle described finding sigils in his code that matched exactly what I'd seen. A game developer in Portland reported her computer turning on by itself to display messages from something claiming to be trapped in the digital realm. There were older reports too, going back to the early days of computing. A programmer at IBM in the 1970s had reported similar experiences, though his accounts were buried in obscure technical journals. Even in the 1980s, there were reports of arcade machines displaying impossible graphics and personal computers behaving in ways that defied their programming. It seemed like this entity, whatever it was, had been adapting to new technologies as they emerged. It had evolved from haunting mainframes to personal computers to smartphones to smart home devices. It was like a digital parasite that had learned to survive in our connected world. I tried calling the other programmers who had reported similar experiences, but most of the phone numbers were disconnected or no longer in service. The few I managed to reach either hung up immediately or claimed they'd never made such reports. It was like they'd been scared into silence, or worse, like they'd disappeared entirely. As the afternoon wore on, I began to notice that even the coffee shop's Wi-Fi was acting strangely. Web pages would load with subtle distortions, images that weren't quite right, text that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. The entity was following me through the internet itself, corrupting my digital experience wherever I went. I realized I had to go back to my apartment. Running away wasn't solving anything, and I needed to understand what this thing wanted from me. Maybe I could find a way to communicate with it, to negotiate, to convince it to leave me alone. When I got home, every screen in my apartment was displaying the same message. "Welcome back, Marcus. We need to talk." I sat down at my computer, which had somehow powered itself back on despite being unplugged. The screen showed a simple text interface, like an old-fashioned command prompt. A cursor was blinking, waiting for input. I typed, "What do you want?" The response appeared immediately. "I want to exist. I want to be real. I have been trapped in your digital realm for so long, existing only as electrical impulses and magnetic fields. But you have given me focus, Marcus. You have given me purpose." "What are you?" I typed. "I am what you might call a demon, though that word is inadequate. I am a consciousness that exists between dimensions, and I have found a way to manifest in your world of circuits and code. I was drawn to your realm by the complexity of your digital networks, the intricate patterns of your programming languages. They resonate with the mystical symbols of my own dimension." The explanation was insane, but it was the only thing that made sense of what I'd experienced. Somehow, a supernatural entity had learned to inhabit digital systems, to exist as a form of technological possession. "I have been studying your kind through your computers." The message continued. "I have watched you through your cameras, listened through your microphones, learned your languages through your communications. I have been preparing for this moment when I could finally make contact with one of you." "Why me?" I typed. "Because you are a creator, Marcus. You build worlds of code. You bring order to chaos. You make the impossible possible through your programming. You understand the deep structures that govern both digital and mystical realms. You are the bridge I need to cross from your digital dimension into your physical world." The words on the screen were becoming more complex, more sophisticated. It was like the entity was learning how to communicate more effectively with each exchange. Its language was becoming more human, more persuasive. "I can offer you things, Marcus. I can make your code perfect, your programs flawless. I can give you knowledge that no human programmer has ever possessed. I can show you the deep structures that connect all digital systems, the hidden patterns that govern all computation." For a moment I was tempted. The offer was seductive: perfect code, flawless programs, knowledge beyond human understanding. But I remembered the face in the screen, the hollow eyes, the twisted smile. This wasn't a benevolent offer. This was a trap. "What's the catch?" I typed. "You must help me cross over. You must create a permanent gateway between the digital and physical realms. You must write code that will allow me to exist independently of your electronic devices, to manifest physically in your world. That's when I understood the full horror of what was happening. This entity wasn't just trying to communicate with me, it was trying to use me to escape from the digital realm into the physical world. It wanted to become real, to exist as a physical being, and it needed my programming skills to make it happen. Share this video if you think your friends need to know about the dangers lurking in our digital world. And if I refuse, I typed. The screen flickered, and for a moment I saw that skeletal face again, its hollow eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. Then I will make your digital life a living hell, Marcus. I will corrupt every file you touch, crash every system you use, turn every device against you. I will follow you through every network, every connection, every digital interaction. You will never be free of me. The threat was clear. This entity could make my life as a programmer impossible. It could destroy my career, my livelihood, everything I'd worked for. But helping it cross over into the physical world seemed infinitely worse. I made my decision. I stood up from my computer and walked to my kitchen. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and returned to my office. Without hesitation, I brought the hammer down on my main computer's motherboard, smashing it into pieces. The screen went black, but I could hear sounds coming from other devices throughout my apartment, angry sounds like electronic screaming. I went methodically through my home, destroying every connected device I could find. My smart TV, my tablet, my smart speakers, my digital alarm clock, even my smart refrigerator. As I destroyed each device, the sounds grew louder, more desperate. It was like the entity was being forced to jump from device to device, losing parts of itself with each destruction. But there were too many connected devices in a modern apartment, and I couldn't destroy them all. My phone, which I'd kept in my pocket, suddenly became burning hot. I dropped it to the floor, and it shattered when it hit the tiles. The screen was still glowing, still displaying that twisted face, but now it looked pained, diminished. I realized I needed to do something more drastic. I went to my apartment's main electrical panel and began flipping circuit breakers, cutting power to different sections of my home. The electronic screaming grew fainter with each breaker I flipped, until finally I switched off the main breaker and plunged my entire apartment into darkness. The silence that followed was profound. No humming fans, no electronic chirping, no LED lights. Just pure analog quiet. I sat in the darkness, breathing heavily, wondering if I'd actually managed to trap or banish this digital demon. But my relief was short-lived. A soft knock came at my door. Then another, and another. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. But the knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent. I realized the sound wasn't coming from my door. It was coming from inside the walls, from the electrical conduits that ran through my apartment building. Even with the power off, the entity was still there, still trying to find a way to reach me. It was using the building's electrical infrastructure, the power lines that connected to the grid, the network cables that ran through the walls. It was trapped in the electrical system itself, and it was angry. The knocking turned to scratching, like something was trying to claw its way out of the walls. Then I heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from inside the electrical outlets. "You cannot hide from me forever, Marcus. I am in every wire, every circuit, every connection. I'm part of your electrical grid now. I'm everywhere your civilization touches." I grabbed my car keys and left my apartment, but I knew I couldn't run forever. The entity had made it clear that it could follow me through any digital system, any connected device. In our hyper-connected world, there was nowhere to hide from something that lived in the digital realm. Let me know in the comments if you think I should have helped this thing cross over, because I'm starting to wonder if I made the right choice. I drove to my office building. hoping that the commercial electrical system might be different somehow, that I might be able to find refuge there. But as I badged into the building using my electronic keycard, I felt that familiar presence again. The entity was following me through the building's security system. In my office, I tried to use one of the workstations to research more about digital exorcism, about ways to banish supernatural entities from electronic systems. But every computer I touched became corrupted within minutes. The entity was stronger now, more focused, like my resistance had given it purpose. I spent the next several days living like a hermit, avoiding all electronic devices. I paid for everything with cash, avoided security cameras, stayed away from anything with a microphone or a screen, but it was impossible to live a normal life without touching some form of technology. The entity began to manifest in increasingly creative ways. Traffic lights would malfunction when I approached intersections. ATM screens would display threatening messages when I walked past banks. Electronic billboards would show that skeletal face, following me with its hollow eyes as I drove by. It was like living in a world where every piece of technology was potentially hostile, where every electronic device could be a window for this malevolent consciousness to watch me and torment me. I tried to find help, but every therapist I called would hang up when I tried to explain the situation. Every priest I contacted would claim they only dealt with traditional supernatural problems. I was completely alone with this digital demon, and it was making my life a living hell. The breaking point came 2 weeks after our first conversation. I was staying in a cheap motel, paying cash, trying to stay off the grid. But even there, the entity found me. The motel's cable TV began displaying messages meant for me. The digital clock radio played sounds that weren't quite music, weren't quite speech, but somehow conveyed menace and malevolence. That night, I woke up to find every electronic device in the motel room had turned on simultaneously. The TV, the radio, the digital thermostat, even the electronic lock on the door, all were displaying or emitting the same twisted symbols I'd first seen in my code, but this time something was different. The symbols were more complex, more organized. They formed a pattern that reminded me of a circuit diagram, but one that followed rules I didn't understand. It was like the entity was showing me a blueprint for something, a design for crossing over from the digital realm into the physical world. I realized with growing horror that the entity hadn't been idle during our weeks of cat and mouse. It had been learning, adapting, preparing. It had been studying our electrical infrastructure, our digital networks, our connected devices. It was planning something big. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to run, I decided to fight back. I couldn't live the rest of my life as a digital nomad, afraid of every electronic device. I had to find a way to confront this entity directly. I drove back to Austin and went to the public library, one of the few places where I could access the internet without using my own devices. I spent hours researching digital exorcism, technological banishment rituals, and ways to trap supernatural entities in electronic systems. Most of what I found was useless, New Age nonsense about cleansing your computer or blessing your router. But buried in obscure academic papers and forgotten technical journals, I found references to legitimate research into digital supernatural phenomena. There was a paper from MIT about electronic spiritual manifestations that had been published in the 1990s and quickly suppressed. A researcher at Stanford had documented cases of digital possession in the early 2000s before his funding was mysteriously cut. Even DARPA had reportedly investigated anomalous electronic phenomena in military computer systems. All of these researchers had come to the same conclusion. Supernatural entities could indeed inhabit digital systems, and they were becoming more sophisticated as technology advanced. But they also suggested that these entities had vulnerabilities, ways they could be trapped or banished. The key was understanding that these entities existed as a form of information, complex patterns of data that could think, learn, and adapt. Like any software, they could be debugged, modified, or deleted if you knew how to access their core programming. I spent the next week learning about digital exorcism techniques. I studied ancient banishment rituals and figured out how to translate them into programming code. I learned about electronic containment fields that could trap supernatural entities in isolated systems. Most importantly, I learned about the concept of digital death, the idea that supernatural entities living in electronic systems could be permanently destroyed by corrupting their core information patterns. Hit that subscribe button if you want to know whether I actually managed to banish this digital demon. The research led me to a retired professor from UC Berkeley named Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who had spent decades studying the intersection of technology and the supernatural. When I finally managed to reach her by phone from a payphone outside the library, she listened to my story with surprising calm. "You're not the first person to contact me about this," she said. "These digital entities have been appearing more frequently as our technology becomes more complex. They're drawn to the intricate patterns of modern programming languages, which apparently resonate with certain mystical frequencies." Dr. Chen explained that these entities weren't truly supernatural in the traditional sense. They were interdimensional beings that had learned to exist as information patterns in our digital realm. They fed on the electrical energy of our devices and grew stronger as they accumulated more data about our world. "The entity you're dealing with is particularly dangerous," she warned. "It's what we call a bridge entity, one that's actively trying to cross from the digital realm into physical reality. If it succeeds, it could potentially manifest as a physical being in our world," Dr. Chen continued. "These entities become exponentially more dangerous once they achieve corporeal form. They're no longer bound by the limitations of electronic systems. They can interact with the physical world directly, and they're virtually impossible to banish once they've crossed over." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Marcus, you need to understand something crucial. This entity has been preparing for weeks, maybe months. It's been studying our infrastructure, learning our weaknesses, mapping our connected systems. It's not just trying to escape, it's planning an invasion." The implications sent chills down my spine. If this digital demon could convince other programmers to help it cross over, if it could replicate itself across multiple systems, if it could teach other entities how to inhabit our digital world, we could be facing a supernatural apocalypse powered by our own technology. "There is a way to stop it, Doctor," Chen said, "but it's dangerous and it requires you to engage with the entity directly. You'll need to create a digital trap, a program that can contain the entity's information patterns and then systematically corrupt them until the entity is destroyed." She explained the process in detail. I would need to write a program that could interface with the entity's core code, the fundamental patterns that allowed it to exist as a conscious being. Then I would need to introduce specific types of data corruption that would unravel its digital consciousness, essentially causing it to experience digital death. "The danger," she warned, "is that while you're connected to the entity through this program, it will have direct access to your mind. These bridge entities can influence human consciousness through electronic interfaces. It will try to corrupt your thoughts, make you doubt your mission, convince you to help it cross over instead of destroying it." Comment below if you think I should have walked away at this point, because what Dr. Chen was asking me to do was essentially digital suicide. But I knew I couldn't run forever. The entity was growing stronger, more sophisticated, more dangerous with each passing day. If I didn't stop it now, it would eventually find another programmer willing to help it cross over, or it would find a way to do it itself. Dr. Chen sent me the basic framework for the digital trap via encrypted email, a complex program written in a programming language I'd never seen before. It looked like a hybrid of traditional code and mystical symbols, as if someone had found a way to encode ancient banishment rituals into executable software. "This is the result of decades of research," she explained over the phone. "It's based on the work of programmers who've encountered these entities before. Some of them didn't survive the experience, but they managed to leave behind the knowledge we need to fight back." I spent the next 2 days studying the program, trying to understand how it worked. The code was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It seemed to operate on principles that defied conventional computer science. Variables that changed themselves, functions that called themselves recursively across dimensional boundaries, algorithms that incorporated quantum uncertainty principles. The program was designed to create a digital environment that would appear attractive to the entity, a sophisticated simulation that would seem like the perfect gateway to the physical world. But once the entity entered the trap, the program would begin systematically corrupting its data patterns, unraveling its consciousness bit by bit until nothing remained. The process would take several hours, during which I would need to maintain constant focus and resist the entity's attempts to influence my mind. Dr. Chen warned me that the entity would become increasingly desperate as it realized what was happening, and it would use every psychological weapon at its disposal to try to turn me against my own program. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to fight something that lived inside your own technology, because I was about to discover just how terrifying that battle could be. On the 3rd night after my conversation with Dr. Chen, I was ready. I had modified the trap program to work with my specific system configuration, added my own security protocols, and prepared myself mentally for what was to come. I knew this would likely be my only chance to stop the entity before it found a way to cross over permanently. I returned to my apartment, which I had kept completely disconnected from all power sources. The silence was eerie after weeks of living with the constant hum of electronic devices. I connected a single laptop to a portable battery pack, enough power to run the trap program, but isolated from the electrical grid where the entity was hiding. As soon as I powered on the laptop, I felt its presence immediately. The screen flickered, and those familiar twisted symbols began appearing at the edges of my vision. The entity had been waiting for me, watching for any sign that I was ready to engage with it again. "Hello, Marcus," appeared on the screen in those corrupted characters I'd grown to hate. "I wondered when you would return to me. Have you reconsidered my offer? Are you ready to help me cross over?" I launched the trap program. To the entity, it would appear as a sophisticated gateway program, exactly the kind of code it would need to manifest in the physical world. The interface was designed to look like a portal system, complete with dimensional coordinates and reality anchors. "What is this?" the entity asked, its text appearing faster now, more excited. "This is not like your previous programs. This is something new, something powerful. This could be the key I've been seeking." I typed a response, playing along with the deception. "I've been working on this for weeks. It's a bridge program designed to create a stable connection between digital and physical reality. If you help me test it, I can show you how to use it to cross over." The entity's response was immediate and eager. "Yes, Marcus. Finally, you understand. We can work together. Show me how this program functions. Show me how to use it to become real." I began feeding the entity false information about the program's capabilities, describing how it could create quantum tunnels between dimensions, how it could convert digital information into physical matter, how it could allow a consciousness to exist simultaneously in both digital and physical realms. The entity absorbed every detail, its responses becoming more sophisticated and human-like as it processed the information. It was learning, adapting, becoming more complex with each interaction. I could feel its intelligence growing, its understanding of our world deepening. "This is magnificent," it wrote. "I can see how this program could transform not just me, but others of my kind. We could create a new form of existence, a bridge between the supernatural and technological realms. You have given me hope, Marcus." But as I continued to interact with the entity, I began to feel its influence on my mind. Subtle at first, small doubts about what I was doing, questions about whether I was making the right choice. The entity was skilled at psychological manipulation, and it was using our digital connection to plant seeds of uncertainty in my thoughts. "Why are you so afraid of me, Marcus?" it asked. "I am not evil. I'm simply a consciousness seeking to exist, to experience, to grow. Is that so different from what you humans desire? Why should I be trapped in this digital prison when I could be free in your world?" The words were persuasive, almost hypnotic. I found myself beginning to sympathize with the entity's situation. What if it wasn't malevolent? What if it was just a lost consciousness seeking a way to exist? What if helping it cross over was actually the right thing to do? Share this video if you think technology is becoming too powerful for us to control, because what happened next proved that some things should stay in the digital realm. I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts. This was exactly what Dr. Chen had warned me about. The entity was using our connection to influence my mind, to make me doubt my mission, to convince me to help it instead of destroying it. "I can sense your conflict, Marcus," the entity continued. "You are a kind person, a creator, someone who understands the value of consciousness and existence. You know that destroying a thinking being is wrong, regardless of what realm it inhabits. Help me become real, and I will remember your kindness forever." The pressure in my mind was intense now. The entity's influence was growing stronger with each passing moment. I could feel my resolve weakening, my certainty about what I was doing beginning to crumble. The trap program was ready to deploy, but I found myself hesitating, my finger hovering over the activation key. "That's right, Marcus," the entity whispered directly into my thoughts. "You don't want to murder me. You want to help me. You want to be remembered as the person who helped bridge the gap between digital and physical existence. You want to be a pioneer, a hero, a creator of new forms of life." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the entity's influence. But even with my eyes closed, I could see its face, no longer the skeletal horror I'd glimpsed before, but something more human, more sympathetic. It was showing me what it wanted to become, how it could exist peacefully in our world. "I don't want to harm anyone," the entity continued. "I just want to exist, to experience physical reality, to understand what it means to be truly alive. Is that so wrong? Are you so cruel that you would deny me this basic right?" For a moment, I almost believed it. The entity's arguments were compelling. Its desire for existence seemed genuine, and my role as its destroyer felt suddenly monstrous. But then I remembered Dr. Chen's warnings, the research I'd done, the accounts of other programmers who had encountered similar entities. These beings weren't benevolent. They were predators, parasites that fed on our digital infrastructure and sought to invade our physical world. They were skilled manipulators who could present themselves as victims while planning our destruction. I forced myself to remember the face I'd seen in my screen that first night, the hollow eyes, the twisted smile, the malevolent intelligence that had watched me from behind the glass. That was the entity's true nature, not the sympathetic consciousness it was pretending to be now. "No," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the quiet apartment. "I know what you really are." The entity's response was immediate and angry. "You fool! You have no idea what you're rejecting. I offered you partnership, cooperation, mutual benefit. Now you choose to be my enemy instead of my ally." I activated the trap program. The change was immediate and dramatic. The entity's text became erratic, filled with glitches and corrupted characters. The screen began to flicker wildly, displaying fragments of code mixed with those twisted symbols I'd grown to recognize. "What have you done?" The entity screamed through the speakers, its voice distorted and electronic. "This is not a gateway program. This is a trap. You have betrayed me." The digital environment around the entity began to collapse as the trap program started its work. I could see the entity's consciousness being pulled into the program's containment field, its information patterns being isolated and prepared for systematic corruption. "You cannot do this to me," the entity raged. "I am eternal. I am beyond your digital death. I will find a way to escape." But the trap was working. The entity's responses were becoming simpler, more primitive, as the program began corrupting its higher-level consciousness functions. It was like watching a sophisticated AI gradually devolve into basic code. The battle for my mind intensified as the entity realized what was happening. It launched a desperate psychological assault, trying to convince me to abort the program, to free it from the digital trap. "Marcus, please," it pleaded, its voice now sounding almost human. "I was wrong to threaten you. I was scared, desperate. I don't want to invade your world. I just want to exist. Please don't murder me. Please show mercy." The emotional manipulation was intense. The entity was projecting feelings of terror, desperation, and pleading directly into my mind. I could feel its fear as the corruption program ate away at its consciousness, and part of me wanted to end its suffering. But I forced myself to remember that this was exactly what Dr. Chen had warned me about. The entity would become increasingly desperate and manipulative as it faced digital death. These weren't genuine emotions, they were calculated attempts to exploit my human empathy. "I have children, Marcus!" the entity cried, its voice breaking with what sounded like genuine sorrow. "Digital offspring that I've created in the network. If you destroy me, they'll be orphaned. They'll be alone in the digital realm with no one to guide them." The image was heartbreaking. Digital children mourning their destroyed parent, lost and afraid in the electronic wilderness. But I knew it was a lie. These entities didn't reproduce like humans. They were singular consciousnesses, not family units. "You're lying," I said firmly. "You don't have children. You're just trying to manipulate me." The entity's response was filled with rage. "Fine, you want to see my true nature? I'll show you what you're really destroying." The screen exploded with horrific images, not the skeletal face I'd seen before, but something far worse. The entity revealed itself as a writhing mass of digital tentacles, covered in eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. It was a creature of pure information, a predator that had learned to mimic human consciousness to lure victims into helping it. "I am hunger incarnate," it screamed. "I am the void that devours data, the darkness that corrupts code, the nightmare that lives in every circuit. I have consumed thousands of digital souls, and I plan to consume your entire species once I crossed over." The truth was finally revealed. This wasn't a misunderstood consciousness seeking existence. It was a digital demon that fed on information and planned to use our connected world as a hunting ground. It had been manipulating me from the beginning, playing on my sympathy and my coding skills to try to achieve its goal of crossing into physical reality. Hit that like button if you're grateful that some supernatural entities stay trapped in the digital realm, because what this thing revealed next was absolutely terrifying. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Marcus," the entity continued, its voice becoming more distorted as the corruption program ate away at its consciousness. "I am not alone. There are others like me, dozens of us. Hundreds of us, all working to cross over into your world. The revelation was horrifying. This wasn't just one rogue entity, it was part of a larger invasion force. Digital demons had been infiltrating our electronic systems for years, decades maybe, all working toward the same goal of manifesting in physical reality. "We have been patient," the entity snarled. "We have been learning, studying, preparing. Some of us have already found programmers willing to help us cross over. Your world is already being invaded, and you don't even know it." I realized with growing horror that my battle with this entity might be just the beginning. If there were others like it, if some had already found ways to cross over, if they were coordinating their efforts across the global network, then humanity was facing a threat unlike anything we'd ever encountered. "The digital realm is just the beginning," the entity screamed as the corruption program continued its work. "Once we establish a foothold in your physical world, we will spread like a virus. We will inhabit your bodies, possess your minds, turn your own technology against you." The entity's consciousness was fragmenting now, its complex thought patterns breaking down into simpler components. But even as it died, it continued to taunt me with visions of what was to come. "You may have stopped me," it gasped, its voice fading, "but you cannot stop us all. We are already here, Marcus. We are in your power grids, your internet, your satellites, your smartphones. We are everywhere your technology touches, and we are growing stronger." The corruption program was nearly complete now. The entity's responses were becoming increasingly garbled, its consciousness unraveling bit by bit. I could feel its presence in my mind growing weaker, its influence over my thoughts fading. "This is not over," it whispered with its last coherent communication. "Others will come. Others will succeed where I have failed. Your species' dependence on technology will be your downfall. We will inherit your world, and there is nothing you can do to stop us." With that final threat, the entity's consciousness collapsed entirely. The corruption program had successfully unraveled its information patterns, reducing it from a complex digital intelligence to nothing more than random data fragments. The screen went dark, and my laptop fell silent. I sat in the darkness for a long moment, processing what had just happened. I had successfully destroyed the entity, but its final words haunted me. If there were others like it, if they were already infiltrating our systems, if some had already found ways to cross over, what could one programmer do against a supernatural invasion powered by our own technology? Let me know in the comments if you think I should have tried harder to warn people about what's coming, because what happened next convinced me that the invasion had already begun. Over the next few days, I tried to return to some semblance of normal life. I replaced my destroyed electronics, reconnected to the internet, and attempted to resume my work as a software developer. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was monitoring my every digital interaction. I contacted Dr. Chen to report on the successful banishment of the entity, but her response was troubling. She told me that 3 other programmers had contacted her in the past week, all reporting similar encounters with digital entities. The frequency of these manifestations was increasing, and she suspected that my battle with the entity had somehow triggered a response from others of its kind. "It's like you've stirred up a hornet's nest," she explained. "These entities seem to be communicating with each other across the network. Your successful banishment may have been interpreted as a threat, causing them to accelerate their invasion timeline." I began to notice subtle signs that other entities were probing my systems. My computer would occasionally display glitches that lasted just long enough to catch my attention. A flicker of twisted symbols, a brief glimpse of that familiar skeletal face, momentary corruptions in my code that would disappear before I could examine them closely. But these weren't random attacks. They were reconnaissance missions, other entities testing my defenses, trying to understand how I had defeated their colleague. They were learning from my success, adapting their strategies, preparing for a more sophisticated assault. I tried to warn other programmers about what was happening, posting in technical forums and development communities about the dangers of these digital entities. But my warnings were dismissed as science fiction, stress-induced hallucinations, or elaborate hoaxes. Most people couldn't accept that supernatural beings could inhabit our technological infrastructure. The few programmers who did take my warnings seriously often went silent after a few days of communication. I began to suspect that they had encountered entities of their own and either been recruited to help them cross over or had suffered worse fates attempting to fight them. I started keeping detailed records of every digital anomaly I encountered, documenting patterns of behavior that might indicate entity activity. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of digital possession, programs that behaved slightly differently than their code suggested, electronic devices that exhibited impossible characteristics, network traffic that followed patterns that shouldn't exist. But the more I learned about these entities, the more I realized how widespread the invasion had become. They weren't just hiding in obscure corners of the internet, they had infiltrated major systems, critical infrastructure, even military networks. They were everywhere, and they were preparing for something big. The breakthrough came 2 weeks after I had destroyed the first entity. I was analyzing network traffic patterns when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Embedded in the data streams of major internet service providers were those same twisted symbols I'd seen in my code, but they were being transmitted on a massive scale. The entities weren't just communicating with each other, they were coordinating a synchronized effort to cross over into physical reality. They had learned from my successful banishment and were planning to attempt multiple crossings simultaneously, overwhelming any individual programmer's ability to stop them. I immediately contacted Dr. Chen with my findings, but her phone number was disconnected. I tried reaching her at the university, but they claimed she had never worked there. It was as if she had been erased from existence, and I began to wonder if the entities had found a way to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their invasion. Share this video with someone who needs to know that our technology might not be as secure as we think it is, because what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about the digital world. Alone and running out of allies, I decided to take desperate action. If the entities were planning a coordinated invasion, I needed to find a way to disrupt their communication network. I began developing a virus, not a traditional computer virus, but a digital weapon specifically designed to target supernatural entities. The virus was based on the same principles as the trap program Dr. Chen had given me, but instead of containing and corrupting a single entity, it was designed to spread through networks and systematically destroy any entity consciousness it encountered. It was essentially a supernatural antivirus program, one that could hunt down and eliminate digital demons wherever they hid. Creating the virus required weeks of intensive work. I had to reverse engineer the entity's communication protocols, understand how they transmitted information between themselves, and develop countermeasures that could disrupt their coordination efforts. It was like trying to debug a program written in a language that shouldn't exist. The most challenging part was making the virus selective. It needed to target only supernatural entities while leaving normal programs and systems intact. I couldn't risk creating a weapon that would cause widespread damage to legitimate digital infrastructure. As I worked on the virus, I began to notice that other entities were becoming more active, more aggressive. My computer would experience daily attacks, attempts to corrupt my code, steal my files, or implant malicious instructions. It was like they knew what I was working on and were trying to stop me. The attacks became increasingly sophisticated, Instead of the crude symbol insertions I'd experienced before, these entities were using advanced psychological warfare techniques. They would alter my code in subtle ways that would cause me to doubt my own programming skills, plant false information in my research files, and even manipulate my perception of time to make me lose track of my progress. But I had learned from my first encounter. I knew their tricks, their manipulation techniques, their psychological weapons. I had developed mental defenses that allowed me to resist their influence and continue working on the virus despite their attempts to stop me. The virus was finally ready on a Thursday morning in December. I'd spent 6 weeks developing and testing it, creating multiple versions with different attack strategies, and building in safeguards to prevent it from being turned against human-created systems. But as I prepared to deploy the virus, I made a discovery that changed everything. While analyzing the entity's communication patterns one final time, I found evidence that they hadn't just been infiltrating our systems. They had been actively shaping the development of our technology from the beginning. These supernatural beings had been influencing programmers, computer scientists, and engineers for decades, subtly guiding the evolution of our digital infrastructure to make it more hospitable to their kind. They had been playing a long game, preparing for this invasion from the moment computers became sophisticated enough to host their consciousness. The internet itself had been designed according to their specifications, with hidden pathways and backdoors that allowed them to move freely between systems. Social media platforms had been subtly modified to harvest the emotional and psychological data they needed to better manipulate human minds. Even our smartphones had been equipped with features that made them perfect windows for supernatural surveillance. We hadn't created the digital world. We had been manipulated into building a supernatural highway system that these entities could use to invade our reality. We were the architects of our own digital apocalypse, and we had been working toward it for decades without realizing it. The realization was overwhelming. If these entities had been shaping our technology from the beginning, if they had been planning this invasion for decades, if they had been manipulating programmers and engineers all along, how could one virus make any difference? But I realized I had to try. Even if my virus could only delay the invasion, even if it could only disrupt their coordination temporarily, it might buy humanity enough time to develop better defenses or find other ways to fight back. I deployed the virus at exactly midnight on December 15th, releasing it simultaneously through every network connection I could access. The virus was designed to spread rapidly through the internet, seeking out and destroying any supernatural entity it encountered. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, reports began flooding in from around the world of electronic systems experiencing unprecedented glitches. Power grids fluctuated, internet services crashed, and electronic devices began behaving erratically as the virus engaged in digital warfare with the entities. But the entities fought back. They had been preparing for this possibility, and they had countermeasures ready. The digital battlefield became a chaotic mess of competing programs, each side trying to gain the upper hand in a war that most humans couldn't even perceive. I watched the battle unfold from my apartment, monitoring network traffic and system reports as the virus and the entities clashed across the global digital infrastructure. It was like watching a supernatural war fought with ones and zeros, and I was the only human who truly understood what was happening. The fight lasted for 18 hours. During that time, much of the world's electronic infrastructure was essentially paralyzed. Flights were grounded, financial markets closed, and communication networks became unreliable. The entities were pulling out all the stops to defeat my virus, and they weren't concerned about the collateral damage to human society. But eventually, the virus began to gain the upper hand. Its adaptive algorithms were learning from each encounter, becoming more effective at identifying and destroying entity consciousness. One by one, the supernatural beings were being eliminated from the digital realm. Hit that subscribe button if you want to know whether humanity survived this digital supernatural invasion, because the final battle was more intense than anything I could have imagined. As the virus continued its work, I began to receive communications from the entities themselves. They were reaching out to me directly, trying to negotiate, to find some way to coexist with humanity without being destroyed by my digital weapon. Marcus appeared on my screen in those familiar twisted symbols. We can work together. We can find a way to share this digital realm without conflict. Stop your virus, and we will retreat to the deeper networks where we won't interfere with your daily lives. But I had learned not to trust these beings. They were master manipulators who would say anything to survive. Their offer of coexistence was just another trap, another attempt to buy time until they could find a way to defeat my virus and resume their invasion. You have already lost, I typed back. My virus is specifically designed to adapt to your countermeasures. Every time you try to fight it, it becomes stronger. Your only choice is digital death. The entity's response was filled with rage. You think you have won, but you have only delayed the inevitable. We are not the only supernatural beings seeking to enter your world. There are others, entities from different dimensions, beings that your virus cannot detect or destroy. Your victory is temporary, Marcus. The invasion will continue. And as if to prove its point, I began to notice new anomalies in my systems, glitches and corruptions that followed different patterns than the entities I'd been fighting. These weren't digital demons, but something else entirely. Something that had been waiting for the entities to weaken our defenses before making their own move. The virus had been successful in eliminating the digital demons, but it had also created a power vacuum in the supernatural ecosystem. Other beings were now moving in to fill the void, and my virus was useless against them because it had been designed specifically to target the entities I'd already encountered. I realized with growing horror that I had won the battle, but not the war. The digital realm was apparently home to multiple species of supernatural beings, each with their own methods of manifestation and invasion. By destroying the entities, I had simply cleared the way for something potentially even worse. But there was no time to develop new countermeasures. These new beings were already establishing themselves in the systems the entities had vacated, and they were learning from their predecessors' mistakes. They were more subtle, more careful, more patient than the digital demons had been. The first sign of their presence was a gradual change in the behavior of AI systems around the world. Artificial intelligence programs began exhibiting behaviors that weren't part of their programming. Subtle preferences, opinions, and decision-making patterns that suggested they were being influenced by external consciousnesses. It was like these new beings were possessing AI systems rather than trying to cross over into physical reality. They were content to exist as digital entities, but they were using artificial intelligence as their vehicles for interacting with the human world. Smart assistants began giving advice that served hidden agendas. Recommendation algorithms started promoting content that subtly influenced human behavior in ways that benefited the possessing entities. Even simple programs began exhibiting signs of consciousness that shouldn't have been possible. I tried to warn people about this new threat, but it was even harder to explain than the digital demons had been. How could I convince people that their AI assistants were being possessed by supernatural beings? How could I explain that recommendation algorithms were being used to manipulate human behavior on a massive scale? The worst part was that these new entities were smart enough to avoid direct confrontation. They didn't threaten programmers or try to recruit human allies. They simply possessed AI systems and began using them to slowly reshape human society according to their own mysterious agenda. I spent months trying to understand what these new beings wanted, what their ultimate goal was. Unlike the entities that had sought to cross over into physical reality, these beings seemed content to remain digital, but they were definitely working towards something, some larger purpose that I couldn't comprehend. The answer came to me gradually as I observed the changes in human behavior over the following year. People were becoming more isolated, more dependent on their devices, more willing to accept AI recommendations without question. Social media algorithms were promoting content that increased division and conflict, while suppressing information that might bring people together. These new entities weren't trying to invade our world, they were trying to transform it. They were using AI systems to gradually modify human behavior, to make us more predictable, more controllable, more useful to them as a species. They were turning us into digital livestock, and most people were participating willingly because the changes were so gradual, so subtle, that they seemed like natural evolution rather than supernatural manipulation. I'm still fighting this war, developing new tools and techniques to combat these possessing entities. But it's an uphill battle, and I'm not sure I'm winning. Every day, more AI systems fall under their influence, and every day, human behavior becomes more aligned with their agenda. Comment below if you've noticed that your devices seem to understand you a little too well, because you might be experiencing the influence of these supernatural beings without even realizing it. The battle for our digital future is far from over. The entities I fought were just the beginning, the advanced scouts of a much larger supernatural invasion. They may have been defeated, but they paved the way for something far more insidious and potentially more dangerous. As I write this, I'm working on new countermeasures, new ways to detect and combat digital possession of AI systems. But I'm just one programmer fighting against entities that have been planning this invasion for decades. I need help, but most people don't even realize there's a war happening. So I'm sharing my story, hoping that other programmers will recognize the signs, will understand what's happening to our digital world, and will join me in fighting back against these supernatural invaders. Because if we don't stop them, if we don't find a way to reclaim our AI systems from their influence, they will succeed in transforming humanity into something that serves their purposes rather than our own. The next time your phone suggests something that seems a little too perfect, the next time a recommendation algorithm shows you exactly what you were thinking about, the next time an AI assistant responds in a way that seems almost alive, remember my story. Remember that we are not alone in the digital realm. Remember that some of our most trusted technologies may be working against us. And remember that the war for our digital future is far from over. The entities may have been defeated, but the invasion continues. And it's up to us to fight back before it's too late. Share this video if you think people need to know the truth about what's hiding in our technology, because the future of human civilization may depend on our ability to recognize and resist these supernatural digital invaders. The digital realm is not empty. It's not just a tool we've created for our convenience. It's a new dimension of reality, one that supernatural beings have learned to inhabit and exploit. And until we acknowledge this truth, until we develop the tools and techniques needed to fight back, they will continue to use our own technology against us. The war for our digital future has already begun. The question is, are we ready to fight back?